Hey everyone, tonight we're starting with something that's going to make you deeply uncomfortable. You know that feeling when someone gets too close to you in an elevator? That moment of awkward invasion of personal space. Well, imagine that feeling, but instead of mild social discomfort, the consequences watching your entire family burned alive in the town square. Tonight, we're talking about a time when personal boundaries weren't just social constructs. They were literally matters of life and death, enforced by the most creative torturers in human history. We're diving into medieval France, where a single moment of human contact, one innocent brush of skin against skin, could trigger a machinery of violence so brutal it still makes historians sick to write about it. I'm talking about what happened. If you kissed the queen, not romantically, God no. Just the wrong kind of greeting, a moment of confusion about protocol, an accident in a crowded room. One touch, and suddenly you're not just dead. You're being made an example of in ways that would give modern horror writers nightmares. Before we go any further, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is where you are. Are you watching this at midnight like I'm recording it? Are you somewhere across the world having coffee while I'm here in the dark? I love knowing we're sharing this moment together, even across time zones and centuries of history. Maybe dim the lights a bit, grab something warm to drink, because tonight we're going somewhere your ancestors probably lived in absolute terror of, the French royal court, where one wrong move didn't just mean social embarrassment. It meant your death, and probably the death of everyone you loved. And hey, if you end up enjoying this dive into history's darkest corners, go ahead and subscribe, but only if you genuinely love this kind of thing. I'm not here to trick you into anything. I just want to share these stories with people who find them as fascinating as I do. So let's step back into a world where a kiss could literally cost you everything, where touching the wrong person meant signing your own death warrant, and where the most powerful woman in the kingdom was quite literally untouchable. You have to understand something that's almost impossible for us to wrap our modern minds around. In medieval France, the queen wasn't just a person. She wasn't even just a very important person. She was a living, breathing piece of God himself, walking around in human flesh. This wasn't metaphorical. This wasn't poetic language. The church, which controlled pretty much every aspect of medieval life, taught that kings and queens were chosen directly by God, that divine blood flowed through their veins, that their very skin was sacred. To touch them without permission wasn't just rude, it was blasphemy. It was literally laying your filthy mortal hands on God's chosen vessel. Picture this. You're a servant in the palace of Queen Isabella of France in the early 14th century. Every morning, you wake up knowing that the woman you serve is supposedly so holy that even her shadow is blessed. The water she bathes in becomes holy water. The clothes that touch her skin are sacred relics. Her breath itself is considered a form of divine wind. Now imagine you're carrying a tray of wine to her chambers, and you trip. As you're falling, your hand reaches out instinctively to steady yourself, and it lands on her arm. Just for a second. Just to keep from falling. That split-second touch, that completely innocent, reflexive human gesture, has just signed your death warrant. Because here's what they believed. Mortal flesh corrupts divine flesh. Your touch, no matter how brief, no matter how accidental, has just polluted God's chosen representative on earth. You've committed a sin, so grave that there's literally no earthly punishment severe enough, which means they have to get creative. Church had developed this beautiful, terrifying theology around royal untouchability. They taught that God had placed a spiritual barrier around his chosen rulers, an invisible shield that ordinary mortals weren't meant to breach. To break through that barrier was to challenge God himself. Think about it like this, how today we have celebrities who seem untouchable, who exist in this weird bubble of fame and wealth that separates them from the rest of us. Medieval queens took that concept and cranked it up to 11, then added the threat of eternal damnation and immediate execution. But here's what's really twisted. They made sure everyone believed this, right down to their bones. From the moment you could walk and talk, you were taught that the queen's body was sacred, that even looking at her too directly could be dangerous. Children grew up having nightmares about accidentally brushing against royal robes. The psychological control was absolute. They didn't just threaten to kill you if you touched the queen. They made you believe that touching her would damn your immortal soul. Your death would just be the beginning of an eternity of torture. And the queen herself, she believed it too. She lived every day knowing that her skin was supposedly divine, that her touch could bless or her anger could curse. Can you imagine the psychological pressure of believing you're a living piece of God? Some queens went mad from the isolation. Others became drunk on the power. This wasn't just about maintaining social order, though it definitely did that. This was about creating a form of human being that existed in a completely different category from everyone else. The queen wasn't just untouchable because she was powerful. She was untouchable because touching her was literally impossible for a mortal to do, without consequences that extended beyond death itself. Walking into the French royal court was like entering a minefield where the mines were invisible, constantly moving, and everyone around you had already seen people blown to pieces for stepping wrong. Picture yourself as a new courtier, maybe the third son of some minor lord, finally getting your chance to make something of yourself at court. You've traveled for weeks to get here. You've spent your family's savings on clothes fancy enough not to embarrass yourself, and you're ready to charm your way into the queen's favor. What you're not ready for is the suffocating paranoia that hangs over everything like morning fog.c. Everyone at court has heard the stories. Everyone knows someone who knew someone who made one tiny mistake and just disappeared, vanished in the middle of the night, along with their entire household. The lucky ones were just exiled. The unlucky ones, well, we'll get to that. So you learn the rules. Oh, the rules. There are rules about how close you can stand to the queen. Rules about where you can look and for how long. Rules about what you can say and when and in what tone of voice. There are rules about rules, literally protocols for who's allowed to explain the protocols to newcomers. But here's the thing that would drive you slowly insane. The rules change constantly. What was acceptable last week might get you killed this week, depending on the queen's mood, the political situation, the alignment of the stars, or just because someone in power decided they didn't like your face. Let's say you're attending one of the queen's daily audiences. You've positioned yourself carefully, not too close to seem presumptuous, not too far to seem disrespectful. You've kept your eyes properly downcast. You've remembered to breathe quietly so as not to draw attention to yourself. Then, the queen starts walking through the crowd, and everyone begins this elaborate dance of stepping backward, bowing, creating space. It's like watching a school of fish part for a shark, except the shark is draped in silk and jewels, and has the power to have you flayed alive. But crowds are unpredictable. Someone behind you doesn't move fast enough. Someone to your left steps the wrong direction. Suddenly you're being pushed forward, losing your balance. Your hand reaching out to steady yourself, and oh God, it's reaching toward her, and everyone around you sucks in their breath because they know what's about to happen, and asterisk, you catch yourself. Just barely. Your fingertips brush the air an inch from her sleeve, close enough that someone in the crowd might claim you actually made contact. Close enough that you can smell her perfume. Close enough that your life is now in the hands of witnesses who may or may not like you. Because that's how it worked. Your fate often depended less on what actually happened than on what people claimed happened. Court was full of ambitious people looking for ways to eliminate competition. Claiming you touched the queen inappropriately was a quick way to remove a rival. The servants had it worst. They had to be close enough to serve her, but never close enough to accidentally make contact. Imagine trying to pour wine for someone you're literally not allowed to touch, not even if she's choking and you could save her life. Servants developed this elaborate choreography of service, these impossibly precise movements designed to fulfill their duties while maintaining that crucial buffer of space. Some servants went years without speaking above a whisper, terrified that raising their voice might be interpreted as aggressive. Others developed nervous tics from the constant stress. The turnover rate among royal servants was, well, let's just say it wasn't because people were finding better jobs elsewhere. And the spies. God, the spies. Everyone was watching everyone else, looking for that moment of weakness, that slip of protocol that could be reported to the right person for the right price. Your fellow courtiers weren't your colleagues. They were potential executioners, waiting for you to give them reason. The queen herself moved through all this like a ghost in golden chains. She couldn't touch anyone either, remember. She was as isolated by her untouchability as everyone else was endangered by it. Imagine going years without feeling another human being's skin against yours, without the comfort of casual contact, without anyone being able to offer you the simple human kindness of a gentle touch when you're sad or scared. Some queens tried to find ways around it. They'd have their ladies-in-waiting touch objects first, then touch the same objects, creating this bizarre chain of indirect contact. Others went completely in the other direction, becoming so paranoid about accidental touch that they'd have servants executed for coming within arm's reach. The psychological toll was incredible. People developed elaborate superstitions and rituals around royal proximity. They'd pray before attending court, fast to purify themselves, carry religious relics for protection. Some courtiers wore gloves even in summer, terrified that their bare skin might somehow accidentally brush against royal fabric. And through it all, everyone pretended this was normal. Everyone acted like living in constant fear of accidental contact was just the natural order of things. Because what was the alternative? Admitting that the system was insane meant admitting that the entire foundation of royal power was built on lies and terror. Which, of course it was. Let me tell you about Philippe de Molay, not the famous Jacques de Molay who led the Templars. This was his younger cousin, a minor courtier who made one mistake and paid for it in ways that still make me sick to think about. It's 1314, and Philippe has been at court for 3 years. He's careful, respectful, knows all the protocols. He's never had so much as a warning from the royal guards, but today is different. Today Queen Isabella is in one of her moods, the kind where servants start looking for excuses to be somewhere else. The queen is walking through her private garden, and Philippe is part of the small retinue following at the prescribed distance. She stops suddenly to examine a rose bush, and the group stops too. That practiced courtly ballet of synchronized movement. But Philippe is distracted. He's been distracted all morning, actually, because he received news that his sister is dying. 3 days' ride away, and he's been trying to work up the courage to ask for leave to see her one last time. His mind is on her fevered face, on whether he'll make it in time to say goodbye. When the queen suddenly turns and starts walking back toward the palace, the retinue reverses direction. But Philippe is still lost in thoughts of his sister. The time he realizes what's happening, the queen is directly in front of him, and momentum carries him forward. His chest bumps against her shoulder, not hard, barely a brush of contact, but unmistakable. For just a moment, everything stops. The queen goes rigid. The other courtiers freeze like statues. Even the birds seem to stop singing. Philippe looks down at the woman he's just touched, this creature who's supposedly made of different flesh than his own, and sees something almost human flicker across her face. Surprise, maybe, or fear. Then the moment breaks. Sees him. The words are quiet, almost conversational, but the royal guards move like lightning. Philippe doesn't even have time to step backward before hands are grabbing him, forcing him to his knees on the gravel path. The queen is already walking away, her ladies-in-waiting fluttering around her like anxious birds. But Philippe can hear her voice floating back. Bring him to the questioning chambers. I want to know if this was deliberate. The questioning chambers. Everyone at court knows what that means. Philippe starts to shake, not from cold, but from the sudden understanding that his life as he knew it ended the moment his body touched hers. They drag him to a stone room beneath the palace, a place that exists in every royal residence but that no one talks about. It's where people go to confess things they may or may not have actually done, where the difference between accident and treason gets sorted out through methods that would make grown men weep. The head torturer, they called him the king's questioner, as if torture was just another form of royal inquiry, is a thin man with soft hands and patient eyes. He explains to Philippe, almost kindly, that everyone understands these things happen. Accidents occur. The important thing is to determine Philippe's true intentions. Did he plan this? Has he been watching the queen, waiting for his chance to defile her sacred flesh? Is he part of a conspiracy? Who else is involved? The questions come slow and gentle at first, punctuated by increasingly creative forms of persuasion. Philippe tells the truth, that he was thinking of his dying sister, that it was an accident, that he's loyal to the crown and would never, ever deliberately touch the queen. But the thing about torture is that it's not really about finding truth. It's about finding the confession that the people in power want to hear. After 6 hours, Philippe confesses to being part of an English plot to assassinate the queen through demonic contamination. After 12 hours, he's implicated 7 other courtiers in the conspiracy. After 18 hours, he's claiming that touching the queen was meant to transfer a curse from his body to hers. A curse he received from a witch in exchange for information about royal movements. None of this is true. Philippe doesn't even believe in curses. But when you're hanging from your wrists with your shoulders dislocated, while a man with patient eyes asks the same questions over and over, truth becomes negotiable. The confession, when it's finally written up, is a masterpiece of creative fiction. Philippe is described as the agent of foreign powers, a practitioner of dark magic, a sexual deviant who lusted after the queen's sacred body. The document makes him sound like the most dangerous man in France, instead of a distracted courtier who was worried about his sister. Word of Philippe's confession spreads through the court like wildfire. Suddenly, everyone remembers suspicious behavior they'd overlooked before. Other courtiers come forward with additional evidence. Maybe they saw Philippe muttering to himself. He was praying for his sister. Maybe he seemed nervous that morning. He was worried about asking for leave. Maybe he positioned himself unusually close to the queen. During previous audiences, he hadn't. The investigation expands. The 7 men Philippe named under torture are arrested. Under their own questioning, they name others. Within a week, 23 people are in custody, all connected to what the royal historians will record as the Garden Conspiracy, a plot that never existed except in the imagination of tortured men desperate to make the pain stop. Philippe's sister dies while he's in custody. He never finds out. By the time his execution date is set, he's been so broken by months of interrogation that he genuinely believes he's guilty of crimes against God and crown. On the scaffold, he begs the queen's forgiveness for his treasonous assault on her sacred person. The queen, watching from her window high above the courtyard, feels nothing but vindication. The system worked exactly as it was supposed to. A threat was identified, investigated, and eliminated. Order was maintained. Philippe's head separates from his shoulders with a single clean stroke, and his body is burned to prevent his corrupted flesh from contaminating holy ground. His family's lands are confiscated. His name is struck from all official records. Within a generation, it's like he never existed at all. But here's the thing that keeps me up at night. Philippe de Malé's story isn't unusual. It's just one of hundreds of similar cases, most of which didn't even rate a mention in the royal chronicles. The Garden Conspiracy was barely a footnote in the larger history of Isabella's reign. This was just Tuesday at the French royal court. What happened after someone touched the queen wasn't really justice in any sense we'd recognize today. It was theater. Brutal, elaborate theater designed to be so horrifying that the memory of it would keep people in line for generations. See, the medieval legal system around crimes against royal persons wasn't really about determining guilt or innocence. Everyone involved, the judges, the torturers, the executioners, sometimes even the accused, understood that the outcome was predetermined the moment the accusation was made. This was about sending a message so clear and so terrifying that it would echo through every conversation, every nightmare, every moment of doubt about challenging royal power. Let me walk you through exactly how this machinery worked, because understanding the process is crucial to understanding the psychology of absolute power. First, the arrest. This didn't happen quietly. When someone was accused of inappropriately touching the queen, royal guards would arrive at their home in the middle of the night, but they wouldn't just take the accused. They'd wake the entire household, family, servants, guests, anyone who happened to be sleeping under that roof, and force them to watch as their loved one was dragged away in chains. The message was clear. This person's crime has contaminated everyone around them. Their very presence has made you all suspect. The guards would often arrest family members too, just to be thorough. Brothers, sisters, parents, children. Blood connection to someone who touched the queen made you guilty by association. The church played a crucial role here. Before any secular punishment could be carried out, the accused had to be excommunicated. A special ceremony would be performed, usually in the cathedral at Notre Dame, where a priest would literally damn the accused person's soul in front of hundreds of witnesses. Picture this scene. Candles being snuffed out one by one as the priest intones the ritual of spiritual death, the heavy cathedral doors slamming shut to symbolize the accused being cast out from God's grace. The bell tolling as if for a funeral, because spiritually, the person was already dead. This ceremony was often attended by other courtiers, who were required to witness what happened to those who transgressed against royal sanctity. Now comes the investigation phase, which is where things get really medieval. The goal wasn't to determine whether the accused actually committed the crime that was assumed. The goal was to determine the scope of the conspiracy, because in the medieval mind, no one acted alone against the crown. The torture was systematic, almost scientific in its approach. They had different techniques for different types of information. There was torture designed to make you confess your own guilt, torture designed to make you implicate others, and torture designed to make you reveal the deeper conspiracy that everyone knew must exist. The rack, the wheel, the Iron Maiden. These weren't just tools of cruelty. They were instruments of statecraft, carefully calibrated to produce the exact type of confessions that would justify the predetermined punishment, while implicating as many other people as possible. Here's what's really twisted. They kept detailed Records of everything. Court scribes would sit in the torture chambers, carefully writing down every confession, every scream, every plea for mercy. These documents were preserved in royal archives, not as evidence of cruelty, but as proof of the crown's diligence in protecting itself from threats. The trials, when they happened at all, were pure pageantry. The accused would be brought before a panel of judges who had already decided the verdict. Evidence would be presented, usually the confessions extracted through torture, testimony from witnesses who had been coerced or bribed, and character. Assassination from people looking to curry favor with the crown. The accused would be allowed to speak, but only to confess. Attempts to maintain innocence would be interpreted as evidence of continued treasonous defiance. The smart ones confessed immediately and begged for mercy. The stubborn ones just prolonged their suffering. Sentencing was where the real creativity came in. Simple execution was for common criminals. Touching the queen required something special, something that would be talked about for decades. They might be drawn and quartered, tied to 4 horses and pulled apart while still alive. They might be burned, but slowly, with green wood that produced maximum smoke and pain. They might be flayed alive, their skin removed in strips while crowds watched and cheered, but the physical torture was just the beginning. The real punishment was the complete erasure of the person from history. Their property would be confiscated, their names struck from all records, their children forbidden from using the family name. Any books, letters, or documents bearing their name would be burned. Artists would be commissioned to paint over their faces in existing portraits, leaving blank spaces where they used to be. This wasn't just about punishing the individual. It was about demonstrating that challenging royal authority didn't just end your life, it ended your existence. You wouldn't just die. You would be made to have never been. The economic impact was enormous too. When someone was convicted of touching the queen, their entire extended family could lose their lands, their titles, their sources of income. Merchants who had done business with them might find their own licenses revoked. Servants who had worked for them could be barred from royal service forever. This created a web of collective responsibility that made everyone invested in policing each other's behavior. Your neighbor's transgression could cost you your livelihood, so you had every incentive to report suspicious behavior, to distance yourself from anyone who seemed potentially problematic, to err on the side of betrayal rather than loyalty. The church got its cut too. Property confiscated from those who touched the queen would often be donated to monasteries and cathedrals, creating a financial incentive for religious authorities to support the crown's increasingly paranoid definition of treason. And here's the most insidious part: the system was self-perpetuating. Each brutal execution created dozens of new enemies of the crown, the friends and family of the executed person, who now had their own reasons to hate the royal family. But expressing that hatred, or even being suspected of harboring it, could lead to their own arrest and execution. So people learned to swallow their grief, to publicly celebrate the death of their loved ones, to actively participate in the system that had destroyed their families, because the alternative was joining them on the scaffold. This machinery of justice wasn't about maintaining order. It was about maintaining terror. And it worked for centuries, until the accumulated weight of that terror finally became too much to bear, and the entire system collapsed in a revolution that was, if anything, even more brutal than the monarchy it replaced. But that's another story entirely. You want to know the most terrifying thing about the royal untouchability system? It wasn't maintained by force alone. It was maintained by belief. Genuine, bone-deep belief that the queen really was different, that her flesh really was sacred, that touching her really would bring divine punishment. Think about that for a moment. Millions of people, across centuries, genuinely believed that certain human beings were made of fundamentally different stuff than everyone else. Not metaphorically different. Actually physically, spiritually different. This wasn't ignorance. This was sophisticated psychological warfare, deployed by some of the smartest political minds in history. They understood something about human nature that we're only now beginning to study scientifically. That if you can control what people believe about the nature of reality itself, you can control everything they do. Let's break down how they pulled this off, because it's honestly kind of brilliant in its evil. First, they started early. From the moment children could understand language, they were taught that the queen was special. Not taught, indoctrinated. Through stories, songs, religious ceremonies, public rituals. Children would grow up literally unable to imagine a world where the queen wasn't sacred, that the church was crucial here. Every Sunday, priests would remind their congregations that God had chosen the royal family to rule, that defying them was defying God himself. Children would hear this message dozens of times before they were old enough to question it. By adolescence, the belief was so deeply embedded that questioning it felt like questioning the existence of the sun or the movement of the tides. But here's where it gets really sophisticated. They made the belief feel good. Being part of a kingdom with a sacred queen made people feel special too. They weren't just random peasants struggling to survive. They were subjects of a divinely appointed ruler, participants in a cosmic drama where good and evil were clearly defined, and they were on the right side. The ritual and pageantry reinforced this constantly. When the queen appeared in public, it was always surrounded by ceremony that made her seem otherworldly. The clothes, the jewels, the music, the incense, everything, designed to create an emotional experience that bypassed rational thought and went straight to the psychological core that responds to mystery and majesty. People would spend weeks preparing for a royal visit, decorating their towns, practicing their vows, teaching their children the proper protocols. By the time the queen actually appeared, the entire population was in a state of heightened emotional receptivity, primed to see magic in everything she did. And then there were the miracles. Oh, the miracles. Whenever something good happened in the kingdom, a good harvest, victory in battle, recovery from plague, it would be attributed to the queen's divine favor. When she touched objects, they became relics. When she blessed people, their ailments supposedly disappeared. The royal historians made sure these stories spread and grew in the telling. But the system was even more clever than that. They made touching the queen not just forbidden, but literally unthinkable for most people. Through a combination of physical barriers, social conditioning, and psychological manipulation, they created a mental block that was stronger than any physical restraint. Most people went their entire lives without ever being in the same room as the queen, much less close enough to touch her. She existed for them as an abstract concept, a figure glimpsed from great distance during ceremonial processions. The idea of actually reaching out and making physical contact with her was as foreign as the idea of reaching out and touching the moon. For those who did serve at court, the psychological conditioning was even more intense. They were taught to see themselves as unworthy, contaminated, polluted by their common birth. The idea of touching the queen wasn't just forbidden, it was literally inconceivable. Like trying to imagine touching the face of God. Some courtiers developed what we'd now recognize as severe anxiety disorders around royal proximity. They'd break into cold sweats when the queen entered a room. Their hands would shake so badly they couldn't hold objects steady. Some would faint from the stress of being in her presence. But here's what's really twisted. The queen believed it too. She was as trapped by the system as everyone else, maybe more so. From birth, she was told she was different, special, sacred. She lived her entire life in isolation, surrounded by people who couldn't touch her, couldn't treat her like a normal human being, couldn't offer her the basic physical comfort that every human needs. Many queens went insane from the isolation. Others became incredibly cruel, using their untouchable status as a weapon against anyone who displeased them. Some became so paranoid about contamination that they'd have people executed for breathing too close to them. The psychological toll on the queens themselves is something we rarely talk about, but it was enormous. Imagine growing up believing that your touch is so powerful it can bless or curse people. Imagine the weight of thinking that every gesture you make has cosmic significance. Imagine the loneliness of being surrounded by people who are literally afraid to treat you like a human being. Some queens tried to rebel against the system in small ways. They'd accidentally brush against servants' hands, or find excuses for their ladies-in-waiting to help them dress in ways that required brief contact. But even these tiny rebellions came with enormous psychological guilt, because they'd been taught that their contaminated touch could damn the souls of the people they cared about. The system created its own enforcement mechanism through guilt and terror. People policed themselves more effectively than any army of guards could have. They internalized the rules so completely that breaking them felt like committing suicide. And it worked for so long because it addressed real human psychological needs. People want to believe in something greater than themselves. They want to feel like they're part of something meaningful. They want clear rules and hierarchies that make sense of a chaotic world. The royal untouchability system gave them all of that, wrapped up in pageantry and tradition, and the comforting belief that someone, somewhere, was specially chosen to carry the burden of divine responsibility. The fact that this system was maintained through terror and brutality got lost in the psychological satisfaction of believing in magic, in specialness, in a divinely ordered universe, where everyone knew their place. By the time people started questioning whether the queen really was made of different flesh than everyone else, the system had been in place for so many centuries that overthrowing it required overthrowing their entire understanding of how the world worked, which is exactly what eventually happened. But first, a lot more people had to die, and here we are. Back in your room, back in your time, the glow of your screen probably the only light cutting through the darkness around you. Take a breath. Feel your own skin, your own heartbeat. Run your fingers along your arm and remember that you're real. You're human. You're touchable. What we just experienced together. This journey into a world where a kiss could end bloodlines. It feels almost impossible to believe, doesn't it? Like some fever dream of absolute power run completely mad. But it happened. For centuries, it was just Tuesday at the French royal court. I keep thinking about Philippe de Molay, worried about his dying sister, his mind somewhere else entirely in that fatal moment when flesh met flesh. How many people throughout history have died for moments just like that? For being human at the wrong time, in the wrong place, with the wrong person. But here's what really gets me. We still do this. Maybe not with queens and curtsies, but we still create untouchable people. We still build systems where the wrong kind of contact, the wrong word to the wrong person, can destroy lives and families. We still worship power and then act surprised when that power corrupts everything it touches. We still have people walking among us who believe they're made of different flesh than the rest of us, who surround themselves with others who reinforce that belief, who punish anyone who dares to suggest that they're just human beings in expensive clothes. The machinery of power has gotten more sophisticated, but the psychology is exactly the same. Make people believe that certain individuals are fundamentally different, fundamentally special, fundamentally untouchable. Make the consequences of challenging that belief so severe that most people never even consider it. And we participate, don't we? We create celebrities and politicians and billionaires, and treat them like they exist in some elevated realm where normal human rules don't apply. We bow to them in different ways with our attention, our money, our votes, our silence. When they do things that would destroy ordinary people, maybe that's why these medieval stories fascinate us so much. They're not really about the past at all. They're about right now, about the ways we still genuflect before power, still allow ourselves to believe in the divine right of kings, even when we call them by different names. I don't know what time. It is where you are now, but wherever you are, whatever you're doing, remember Philippe. Remember that every system of power depends on making people believe that resistance is impossible, that the powerful are untouchable, that the way things are is the way things must always be. And remember that every system of power, no matter how ancient or absolute or divinely sanctioned it claims to be, is just made up of people. People with skin and hearts and fears just like yours. The Queen of medieval France, for all her supposed divinity, bled when she was cut. She cried when she was sad. She died when her time came, just like everyone else. Her untouchability was never real. It was just a story we told ourselves, a story backed up with enough violence to make it feel true. The question is, what stories are we telling ourselves now? And what would happen if we stopped believing them? Sweet dreams, everyone. Try not to think too hard about what you'd be willing to die for, or what you'd be willing to kill for. Actually, on second thought, maybe think about it a little, just in case.